Work and learn. Meet Light Meet Max සක්‍රිය කර ගැනීමට MySLT app එකට log වෙන්න. Work and learn. Meet Light Meet Max සක්‍රිය කර ගැනීමට MySLT app එකට log වෙන්න.
දසනකාන්තී චූර්ණය සහිත ලීවර් ආයුෂ් දන්තාලේපය දත්වල ඇති ප්‍රශ්න 10ක් වළකයි.
Tonight, President Ranil Wickremesinghe informs US AID Administrator Samantha Power that he is to give Parliament 6 months to agree on electoral reforms.
I'm going to call the Parliament to say once and for all that they must agree on electoral reform. I give them 6 months. If they don't, I'll have a referendum and ask the country which system they want.
What was done in the telecom sector, if that could be done in other sectors in an expeditious and transparent way, it would be incredible.
No strings attached. Samantha Power says aid given by the United States comes with no strings attached, but rather on how it can truly benefit the Sri Lankan people on the ground. Oversight. Amnesty International calls on UNHRC to strengthen regulatory oversight over Sri Lanka as the country prepares itself for the 51st session of the UNHRC starting from tomorrow. Title winning. Sri Lanka crowned Asian netball champions. President commends team for setting an example. All this and much more coming up tonight on First at 9, this Sunday, the 11th of September 2022.
Vim Deara milliliter CS Smart Pack එක රුපියල් 85ට දැන් වෙළඳ පොලේ.
From AdaDerana, this is AdaDerana First at 9. Live from Studio 24 in Colombo.
Good evening and welcome to AdaDerana 24's English News. I'm Andrew Bernard. In your top story for tonight, the administrator of the United States Agency for International Development, Samantha Power, who was on a 2-day visit to Sri Lanka, called on President Ranil Wickremesinghe today. During the meeting, Power observed that it would be incredible if the reforms made in the country's telecom sector can be implemented in other sectors. President Ranil Wickremesinghe meanwhile touched on the democratic aspects of the country, saying he will give Parliament 6 months to agree on electoral reforms, and if not agreed, he will go for a referendum to ask the public the type of electoral reforms they wish for.
Administrator of the United States Agency for International Development, Samantha Power, who arrived in Sri Lanka for a 2-day official visit yesterday, called on President Ranil Wickremesinghe at the Presidential Secretariat this afternoon.
PTA detentions, we've talked with the Tamils, we've agreed on a formula that will set off against the judgment the period in detention. Since they have all had more than 10 years, no judgment will more than 10 years. It will be out except for the few who had bombed the Temple of the Tooth and the assassination, I think, of 1 or 2 other members. Thereafter, I've asked the intelligence agencies to identify all the Muslims under detention after April Easter bomb who can be released. We've asked the Scotland Yard to come in, review the reports and come to a final conclusion on this whole issue. Was there a hidden hand behind the bombing? And if so, who's the hidden hand? Then we are bringing out the Northern Development Plan. With renewable energy, North will become a big economic center, followed by the Trincomalee Development Scheme. We are also bringing in the new anti-terrorist legislation. I'm going to call the Parliament to say once and for all that they must agree on electoral reform. This has been going on. The parties are arguing among themselves. I give them 6 months. If they don't, I'll have a referendum and ask the country which system they want. Because the political parties can't be putting this off forever. They have to bite the bullet at some stage. So if they are not willing, I have not told them yet, we'll go for a referendum.
Questions about whether the private sector can be unleashed. You have such an incredible private sector, such entrepreneurship, but the government over so many years has largely stood in the way of unlocking that potential instead of fueling it. Mangala used to say, as you know, government has no business running business. And, you know, what was done in the telecom sector, if that could be done in other sectors in an expeditious and transparent way, way, just again, to unlock the potential of your people, it would be incredible.
By 2048, we have to become a prosperous economy. 2048 is the centenary of our independence. So the plans and the roadmaps will come from 2023. It's a 25-year program to go ahead. So this is where we will need your assistance.
The administrator of the United States Agency for International Development, Samantha Power, also pledged another donation of $20 million for Sri Lanka today, which is expected to combat hunger and malnutrition in the country. The donation to the country comes after a further $40 million was pledged to the country, given to the farming community in the country yesterday to purchase fertilizer needed for the upcoming Maha season, and for 53,000 farmers in need of emergency cash assistance.
Do you feel that there needs to be a stronger impetus with a new president leading Sri Lanka's government now, that Sri Lanka has a greater role to play in terms of making sure that accountability takes center stage?
It has been a long time, the oversight mechanism of the jurisdiction of the Human Rights Council being established for Sri Lanka. I know that there is fatigue here by some who would like to see Sri Lanka be able to go its own way and for the United Nations role to recede. But I think it is also very clear on the ground that aspirations of those who survived really difficult, a very difficult conflict over many years, the aspirations of those individuals to see justice and even to secure basic facts and basic truth, or to obtain some knowledge around missing persons, those processes around which there have been multiple attempts to generate progress, have not yielded the kind of facts, the kind of truth, and the kind of justice that so many Sri Lankans crave. I think we all agree that it is in Sri Lanka where those mechanisms are most needed, and there is a lot of technical support and a lot of expertise in the international community that is ready to be brought to bear, and did again engage with the president on this today. It is clear that these are issues that are very much part of what brought some Sri Lankans out to demand change, and it is clear that the commitments that have been made in the past, again, haven't been delivered sufficiently to address those deeply held aspirations. And I will say, as somebody who's traveled, met with survivors of the violence, and seen, as so many of you have, mothers, still carrying the photos of children who've gone missing, any step that can be made to offer solace to families who have endured the kind of violence and suffering that has occurred in this country is important for us all to stand behind.
Meanwhile, in an exclusive interview with AdaDerana, the administrator of the United States Agency for Development, Samantha Power, emphasized that the aid given by the United States comes with no strings attached. Speaking to Indivari Amuwatha before concluding her visit in the country, the USAID administrator said that their funds would rather focus on how it can truly benefit the Sri Lankan people on the ground.
There has been a lot of skepticism about US funding in Sri Lanka, whether there are any strings attached to it. So will there be any strings attached going forward?
A distinguishing feature of U.S. assistance in Sri Lanka is that really look to see how our assistance can empower our partners on the ground, Sri Lankans on the ground. And, I can say just from meeting with the farmers yesterday to whom we're providing the fertilizer, our goal is for them to have bigger yields in the next rice planting and harvesting season, full stop. Our goal is not for them to have bigger yields so that we can take a cut of the yields, or so that we can then say, hey, we gave you that fertilizer money, now you better do this for us, here and this. That's really not the American approach. And I think that when you talk about debt and US aid, I think what we are focused on now, because we work at the grassroots level, or try to, is there are a lot of Sri Lankans now who are carrying debt that, had the economy continued to function as it had in years past, maybe not perfectly, but nonetheless functionally, they would have been able to, for example, produce the kind of crop that would allow them to pay back the people that they borrowed in order to buy the fertilizer, in order to be able to plant and nourish the crop in the first place. But now that with the economic collapse, it's not clear how a lot of Sri Lankans are going to be able to repay their debt. And so one of the things that we are looking at as USAID is at the micro level, with small farmers, with tenant farmers, with people who borrow just to be able to pay school fees to get their kids to school. What can we do in support of those families? But additionally, since it's incredibly important that the Sri Lankan government be providing the support to the most vulnerable, and certainly we heard from the president today an intention to address food security and malnutrition, in the most vulnerable. But, we can help with program design, drawing on other social safety net programs that we have supported in other parts of the world. Again, even though the civil service is very large in Sri Lanka, making sure that there is the human capacity to implement these programs and to do so in a way where the intended beneficiaries are reached and where assistance is not deployed because of some political favor or out of some political preference, but is deployed on the basis of need.
Now, the interview with Indivari Amwatha will telecast tomorrow at 1 p.m. on AdaDerana 24. In the meantime, the interactive dialogue on the report of the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights on Sri Lanka will commence tomorrow at 2:45 p.m. in Sri Lankan time at the 51st session of the United Nations Human Rights Council commencing in Geneva. Reports suggest a new resolution on Sri Lanka is to be made public this week, which is said to include the issue of economic crimes that have taken place due to the impunity and the violation of rights of the Sri Lankan citizens. The 51st session of the United Nations Human Rights Council will commence in Geneva in Switzerland tomorrow. The interactive dialogue on the report of the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights will commence tomorrow at 2:45 p.m. Sri Lankan time. The report urged the Sri Lankan government to embark on a national dialogue to advance human rights and reconciliation and call for accountability and deeper institutional reforms to prevent a recurrence of past violations. During the session, the head of the Sri Lankan delegation in Geneva, Minister of Foreign Affairs Ali Sabri, will make a statement on the progress Sri Lanka has made in the human rights front. Media reports say a new resolution on Sri Lanka is to be made public this week, following the commencement of the session, and the proposed new resolution on Sri Lanka would, for the first time, mirror the report of the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights. The proposed resolution is to include the issue of economic crimes that have taken place due to impunity and the violation of rights of Sri Lankan citizens. It will also include proposals and recommendations that have remained unimplemented since 2012, including the appointment of an 8-member group to inquire into alleged human rights violations in Sri Lanka. Now, Amnesty International has urged the United Nations Human Rights Council to strengthen the existing Sri Lankan Accountability Project of the Office of the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights that was established to collect, consolidate, and analyze and preserve information and evidence for future. They also called on the UN member states to reflect the gravity of the situation on the ground and recognize the necessity for those mechanisms to take action to advance human rights, protection, and the accountability in the country.
Amnesty International has urged the United Nations Human Rights Council, when it meets for the 51st session between 12th of September and 7th of October, to strengthen the existing Sri Lanka Accountability Project of the Office of the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights that was established to collect, consolidate, analyze, and preserve information and evidence for future. In a briefing paper, the rights organization also called on the UNHRC to set up an expert mechanism on Sri Lanka to monitor, report, and provide recommendations on human rights concerns that are at the core of the current crisis. Amnesty International said the document details how the international mechanisms it recommends have a critical role to play in addressing the human rights, economic, and political crisis in Sri Lanka, which are strongly interlinked and deeply rooted in the culture of impunity that has plagued Sri Lanka for decades. The rights organization called on UN member states to reflect the gravity of the situation on the ground and recognize the necessity for these mechanisms and take action to advance human rights protection and accountability in Sri Lanka.
Stay with us for more news on the other side of this break.
Big 3.
Uber Eats මගින් ඉදිරිපත් කරන ආදරයෙන් අවශ්‍යතා ඇති අයට අත්‍යවශ්‍ය භාණ්ඩ පරිත්‍යාග කිරීමට වේදිකාවක්.
Welcome back. Now, opposition leader Sajith Premadasa says the main opposition Samagi Janabala Vegia cannot be deceived by offering ministerial posts. He made these comments while addressing a public gathering in Dehiwala. Speaking at the same event, parliamentarian Dr. Harsha De Silva said a new government following an election is the need now to solve the problems to the people, since it is difficult for the president to address public issues within an SLPP government.
ඔවුරු හරි හිතනවා නම් ඇමතිකම් දික් කරලා අපිව මං මුලා කරන්න පුළුවන් කියලා මම ආණ්ඩුවට කියනවා හොයාගන්න වෙන පක්ෂයක් රවට්ටන්න මේ සමගි ජන බලවේගය ඔය රවටිල්ලට සූදානම් නැදේ කියන එක මම මේ අවස්ථාවේ ප්‍රකාශ කරනවා. අපි පෙන්නලා තියෙනවා අපි තනතුරු වලට කෑදර නැහැ. අපි රට පාවා දෙන්නේ නැහැ. ජනතාව අතරමං කරන්නේ නැහැ. ඕනෑම කැපකිරීමක් කරලා අපි සූදානම් හොඳ දෙයට සහයෝගය දෙන්න.
150ට තියෙන දුප්පත්කම අපි කොහොමද 103ට 4ට ගේන්නේ? 94ට තියෙන ආහාර උද්දමනය අපි කොහොමද 103ට බස්සන්නේ? රැකියා විරහිතභාවය එන්න වැඩි වෙනකොට අපි මේ රැකියා විරහිතභාවය කොහොමද අඩු කරන්නේ? මේවා තමයි අපිට විසඳන්න තියෙන ප්‍රශ්න. මේ ප්‍රශ්න විසඳන්න කාටද පුළුවන්? රනිල් වික්‍රමසිංහ මහතා ජනාධිපතිවරයාට හැකියාවක් තියනවද මේ කටයුත්ත මේ පොහොට්ටුවේ කට්ටියත් එක්ක කරගෙන යන්න? කරන්න බෑ. අපි බලාපොරොත්තු වෙන්නේ හැකි ඉක්මනින් පාර්ලිමේන්තු ඡන්දයක් හරහා අලුත් රජයක් නිර්මාණය කරලා ජන මතයක් තියෙන රජයක් නිර්මාණය කරලා කෙසේ හෝ මේ දුක් විඳින ජනතාවට සංවර්ධනය ගේන්න අපේ උපරිම උත්සාහය දරන්න.
Now, the Sri Lankan Navy intercepted a local multi-day fishing trawler during a patrol conducted off Bariklo with 85 passengers on board, suspected to be an illegal migration attempt to a foreign country via sea. Apprehended suspects include 60 men along with the boat operators and 14 women and 11 children. The suspects held were identified as residents of Bariklo, Trincomalee, Muthur, Kilinochi, Jaffna and Madhu. The group was brought to the Trincomalee harbour and will be handed over to the Trincomalee Harbour Police for onward legal proceedings. The Minister of Labour and Foreign Employment Manusha Nanakara says that the foreign exchange sent by expatriate workers to the country has increased by 16.4% in August compared to July this year. He also said the number of workers who have registered with the Sri Lanka Bureau of Foreign Employment to leave for foreign jobs this year has exceeded 200,000. According to the minister, the amount of foreign labour remittances, which was $279 million in July, has increased to $46 million to $325 million by the month of August. The minister said that he would like to express his gratitude to every expatriate worker who sent money through the banking system legally, and that all Sri Lankans need the support of the expatriate workers at this time with the country facing a foreign exchange shortage. Meanwhile, during this year, the number of workers registered with the Sri Lanka Bureau of Foreign Employment has increased to leave employment for foreign employment so far. The minister said that the target of sending 300,000 workers for foreign jobs at the target has been increased to 330,000 due to high demand on both part of the job seekers and the labour receivable countries. Now, the European Central Bank policymakers see a rising risk that they will have to raise their key interest rate to 2% or more to curb the record high inflation in the Eurozone despite a likely recession. The inflation hitting 9.1% in August and seen above the ECB's 2% target for 2 years to come, the central bank has been raising its interest rates at record speed and urging governments to help bring down the energy bills that have ballooned since Russia invaded Ukraine. The ECB raised its deposit rate from 0 to 0.75% on Thursday, and President Christine Lagarde guided for another 2 or 3 hikes, saying rates were still far away from a level that will bring down inflation to 2%. 5 sources closer to the matter have told Reuters that many policymakers saw a growing probability that they will need to take the rate into restrictive territory for a level of rates that causes the economy to slow at 2% or above. Sri Lanka scored 170 runs for the loss of 6 wickets against Pakistan in the Asia Cup Finals 2022. Pakistan now is following 170 runs. With that, we end up today's session of First at 9. Have a pleasant evening. Good night.